Pulsex and Pulsechain, they are both going to be launching very, very soon. I think we're all a little bit excited about these. But what is going to happen? Were you able to get in on Pulse and Pulsex? Well, I got this question here from Arnold, where he asks, I got into Pulsex sacrifice, but he missed out on the Pulse sacrifice. Think I should switch his Pulsex for Pulse during the first 48 hours, or just DCA, dollar cost average, some capital into Pulse for the first few weeks / months? And I thought this was an interesting question for a couple different reasons. First of all, similar boat that I'm in, I missed out on Pulse, but I got in on Pulsex. Second, because does this ratio seem realistic? So I put together a little example here that we're going to talk about, right? And then I wanted to take a look at some previous data of other blockchains. How did they perform? How did their price perform in the first several months? So we've got, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, and Solana. How did they all perform in their first several months? Could that give us an indicator of what might come to happen with Pulse in the first couple months after launch? And then I wanted to ask you a serious question. I don't know this question, but I'd struggle with it on either side, and it determines the answer to this question for you. And I'll give you my thoughts towards the end, so if you want to skip ahead, go ahead. But my thoughts to this question are going to, or your answer to this question is going to determine more than likely what you should do. So with that being said, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam, and for those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. If you're returning and you're not subscribed, I don't know what is wrong with you. You should probably be subscribed. Anybody who wants to support the channel, you can check out some links down below. Appreciate you. And you can jump over to Twitter or Instagram. If you like fitness related stuff, jump over to Instagram. Post over there daily in terms of stories and whatnot, if you like that kind of stuff. If you prefer just the text and related stuff, jump over to Twitter, and I am active over there as well. Also have another YouTube channel down below that's related to fitness stuff. Well, let's get into the video. I think to give context, we should first take a look at Pulse and Pulsex, the time frame, right? Because like Arnold here, I'm in the same boat where I got into Pulsex, but I missed out on Pulse. And I got into Pulsex 2 days before the end of the sacrifice. So I got in like right before everybody. Like everybody's like, hey bitch, we already did this thing. You get sloppy seconds. And that was me, and that's when I got in. So I think that there's a lot of people in there. And to illustrate this, I pulled up Google Trends. So Google's the largest search engine in the world. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. So Sam, what the fuck does that mean? Well, if you think about the search engine, what is it a good gauge of? Not in terms of like, oh, you put in something and you get the result that you might desire, but if you look at the data standpoint, what does it tell us about people's search? It tells us their intent, right? Or what they're actually looking for and interested in. And so when we put in Pulsechain and Pulsex, we get a very macro view of what people are searching for. This blue line here is Pulsechain, and we get to see, obviously it came out way back in July 2021. And we get to see this, that there's no real trend or anything with the data. We get to see a pop of, right here during the sacrifice, a pop of interest, kind of drops off and just kind of sits at this level pretty flat. And then the red is Pulsex. Pulsex comes out and it skyrockets, right? Because during this period, and I remember I wasn't around during this period into this ecosystem. Well, during this period here, from the people that I have talked to, this period was very short, right, in terms of people's understanding of what was actually going on, because we had a couple things playing out. And Motley Investor over on Twitter I think gave me a good idea of how this actually played out. When we look at how things used to be done in legacy, if somebody was starting a company, right, they would do a series of funding rounds, or they would go public after that. And this would be called an IPO. In the crypto world, when somebody wants to raise funds, right, they might do that again privately with some friends and stuff to get things started, create a white paper, etc. And then they would go through and they would do an ICO, initial coin offering. But there's a lot of like questions raised, mainly by the SEC and regulators around the world, in terms of the regulators want to get their grimy fingers involved in these things, right? Well, there is a lot of people that get scammed, right? There's a lot of fraud. That's what happens in a free market. There's people who are not paying attention and do dumb shit, right? And then there's a lot of scumbag people who just do rip people off because they find that easier to do than actually providing value. And the ICO has, like, that initial coin offering has been challenged and is currently being challenged in the Ripple SEC case, right? Where if it is deemed by the court that XRP is a security, then SEC gets to get their grimy fucking fingers in there and regulate, right? So when you take a look at Pulsechain, Richard Hart brought to the forefront something that has never been done before called a sacrifice. So put yourself in the context of what was actually taking place a year ago. You had initial coin offerings and things like that, or different airdrops to different things like Hex, how Hex went through an airdrop to BTC, basically, where you can get it for free if you had BTC. Well, in this case, it was brand new. There's a lot of people who already know. There's a lot of scams involved. A lot of questions. There needs to be when you change directions like that, and you're like, oh, everything's an ICO, right? Or a airdrop, or somebody gets it to claim for free, right? And then there's a new model, and it's called a sacrifice. Well, that does one thing in terms of solving the regulatory issue, or at least that is the idea behind it. It hasn't currently been tested yet. We'll see if it is tested, right? I would believe that it will be tested. I do believe that it's going to hold up, but who the fuck am I to know? It's up to the judge, and if the judge is having a bad day, right, could easily go the opposite direction. Like, it's not like it's determined in some special way. The judge will just be like, somebody can get to the judge and pay a judge off. But anyways, that's besides the point. Let's get into this. So there's this brand new thing coming to market. People don't understand it, and there's shitloads of questions. So there's a lot of people who are like, hey, there's this scam over here, this scam over here, this scam over here, this scam over here. I don't think that I'm going to put money into this, right? And the period at which people could actually sacrifice was relatively short. So then you have, right after that, all this time period where people are continuing to talk about it, continuing to learn about it, continuing to understand what a sacrifice is, why a sacrifice is structured as a sacrifice to effectively get around legally the the Howey test, or regulatory scrutiny in a sense. So then you have this buildup of education and transparency that is taking place, and then Pulsex comes out with their sacrifice, and I believe it was a much longer sacrifice. And during that time, there was a giant amount of people that were like, hey, I missed out in Pulse, so I'm going to go in on Pulsex. Now I've got an understanding, right? During this period, over the previous several months, people were educating themselves, people were learning, lots of people were asking questions. Richard Hart was making videos about things, explaining things, being transparent about that. And there's a bunch of people that got into Pulsex that did not get into Pulsechain. And when we take a look at that, going back to this question here, what I see potentially happening could be a lot of people switching from Pulsex to Pulsechain because people are like, hey, I missed out, right? They got FOMO. They missed out on Pulse, and they might be switching out to Pulse. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or not, especially when we take into consideration this ratio. When you understand how these ratios work, right? So let's take a look at this. I put together this little example. Right here is how an AMM bot works. This is an automated market maker. So instead of having Coinbase be the middleman, they're going to take the either side of the trade, whatever. If there's nobody there, they're going to take the side of the trade, right? And they're earning the fees. Well, in an AMM, you have people like you and I that are the liquidity providers. So say if somebody's going to go from Bitcoin to Ethereum on Coinbase, right? Somebody has to, and they want to take their BTC and sell it, and then at the same time they're going to buy Ethereum. So somebody has to sell. Somebody has to buy their BTC, and then somebody has to sell them ETH so that they can do that swap. Well, in the Bitcoin Ethereum case, Coinbase makes the money, right? Because they're going to take the margin on that. They're going to take the delta, the differences right there, and then you're going to get charged to the customer. Well, in an AMM, I put in $1,000 of BTC, I put in $1,000 of ETH, and then I earn that. Not anybody else. I get to earn that, or you get to earn that. Anybody who provides liquidity. So instead of, say, the billions of dollars getting made by Coinbase, those billions of dollars now get to be made by the people who actually provide the liquidity. And the formula that is used is X times Y equals K. Instead of having to try to understand the market as in, we have these buy orders coming in, we have these sell orders coming in, right? And Coinbase is basically routing those to try to get together, and they're going to make the differences between those two, between the buy orders and sell orders. In this case, it's all based on a ratio, right? Because it's all code. It's all code in the AMM. So we have X, and this equals the quantity of a coin. Y equals the quantity of a coin times the K is those two times each other, or a constant. So this, when it says constant, that just means it remains constant. It doesn't change. Excuse me. Unless you're adding more to both sides, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So let's say that PLS quantity is 10,000, PLSX is 10,000, right? Now, if we take those two together, that's 100,000. I'm sorry, 100 million, right? Now, if we sell for X, right? Say we're going to exchange PLSX for Pulse, as this gentleman says right here said so, right? Well, the ratio changes. So in this case, say we're going to take $1,000 of PLSX for PLS. Well, that means that there's going to be, if you look at this pool, right, there's going to be $1,000 less of one coin, right, because they're taking PLSX for PLS. So the quantity of PLSX is going to go up, and the quantity of PLS is going to go down. And that is going to change the price, right? So $1,000 in terms of this case, PLS quantity, I'm sorry, this should be PLSX, I think. The quantity of the one is going to go up, the quantity of the other is going to go down, and this has to stay the same. In order for this to stay the same, I think this should be PLSX, right? The price changes for this. So the ratio would be $1.20. So when I look at this and I see he's mentioning a 1-for-1 in the first 48 hours, I personally don't think it is going to be a 1-for-1 ratio because of this. because of what is going to be taking place here, right? So let's add, say if we add 2 more zeros to these, because the numbers are probably going to be way higher, right? So let's add, let's add something to these. Wow, I'm struggling here. 2 more zeros, right? Okay. So if somebody's just doing $1,000 worth, right? It's not going to change the price much here, if you look, right? But this is just a tiny one. If there's a lot of people, remember this here, this shows the YouTube search volume. I'm sorry, this shows us the YouTube search volume here. And there's a lot of people doing this, even at these higher numbers where we have 100 million Pulse and 100 million Pulsex. So say this is $1 million worth, right? Then it's still going to change it by 2 cents. And we're going to have a lot, in my opinion, I think we're going to have a lot of people that are going to be trying to change their Pulsex for Pulse. I think there's going to be a lot of those people who are trying to do that for the exact reason that I just described. Now, does that make sense to do that? Because this is going to probably drive this up. And then let's take a look at those charts to understand what actually happens in the first month. So does it make sense to do the switch before everything actually goes live, or does it make sense to just DCA, dollar cost average, like buy a little bit every week or every month? Because in my opinion, I don't think it makes sense to do this beforehand. Now, like, this is not fucking financial advice, it's just an opinion, right? But I don't think it makes personal sense. You can take that what it is and run with it. Now, this is the Ethereum price chart from the beginning. As you can see, it basically trended down for several months. Let's take a look at Bitcoin. Again, this is again from the beginning for Bitcoin. Again, trended down for several months. Solana, basically flat for several months. So that was Solana. This is Cardano. Cardano went up marginally, right? Not by much at all. Just a teeny little bit over the first several months. So should somebody go through and try to do the exchange then, or dollar cost average in? Well, I think that's really going to depend upon what we just looked at and your opinion on if you think that it's going to have similar performance as the other. There's other 4 chains which are also, there's a tremendous amount of economic energy in those. Do you think that it's going to have a similar effect on those or not? And the answer to this question, and I've asked myself this question because I don't know, so I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think Pulse is more like Verizon in the sense that Verizon provides the framework for which Apple or other companies to reside on, right? Apple, if there was no internet, Apple phones wouldn't be worthwhile, right? To operate on, right? Is Pulse more like that, or is Pulse more like Apple and they're creating the Apple store, right, for the apps inside the store? You can decide. Or is Pulsex more like Apple in the sense that they're living on the internet that is provided by Verizon, right? Verizon provides it, but there's a lot of people. Remember, there's a lot of blockchains out there. So is Pulsex, in the first example, is Pulsex more like Apple, where they're living on the internet that is provided by Verizon, and Pulse is more like Verizon, where Apple's way more valuable than Pulse, right? Some people think that's not the case. Other people think it is. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. Or is Pulsex more like an app in the App Store, and Apple is more like Pulse in the sense that Apple created the App Store? I don't know. I mean, the one analogy is easier to think of, but don't don't let that fool you just because something, there's a bias called the recency bias, right? Something that's easier to like remember and think of, people think is more accurate, whether it's actually true or not, just because of the recency of which they're able to accurately recall that. So the example of Apple in the App Store, yes, something that is a little bit more conceptual, Verizon providing the framework for Apple or Facebook, we could say, to live on top of it, right? Facebook is far more valuable than Verizon. Which one is it more like? Because your answer to that is going to probably indicate what you should do. Right? Should you hold more pulse? Should you hold more Pulsex? What do you think is going to win out in the end? I'm personally more bullish on Pulsex, right? But then you're like, Sam, well, you didn't get Pulse. So of course you're going to be more bullish on Pulsex. Cool. I completely get that. 100%. 100%. I think that it does seem that way, right? But I don't know. Where is that value going to reside, right? Do I think both of them are going to win? Yeah, I do. I think Pulsex might do better. Yeah, I think it might, personally. But then again, remember, I just told you, I don't have Pulse. I only was able to get in on Pulsex. So there's clearly a bias there because I only own one and not the other. I'm going to continue learning and educating myself. If I saw a reason to believe that Pulse was more popular, then I would say Pulse. But when I look at this data here, right, this is the search volume on YouTube. I actually just did a video on this comparing social indicators, right? Because what's going to drive price? Demand. So if demand, what's going to drive demand is the awareness of something. So if nobody knows what something is, even if it's fucking supposedly amazing, right? The demand is going to be low. Well, when you look at Pulsex on Google, on YouTube, the two largest search engines in the world, Pulsex has remained above Pulse. If you look, and you can check out the other video to get the full analysis of this, but you can take a look at hashtag usage on Instagram, Pulsex Pulse. You can take a look at hashtag usage on TikTok. You can take a look at the number of views for each of Pulsechain versus Pulsex. You can take a look at the number of people creating content for these. You can take a look at the website traffic of Pulsex.com or Pulsechain.com. Which website is more popular? You can take a look at the Telegram group. Which Telegram group is growing faster? You can take a look at Twitter followers and see which Twitter is growing faster. Not that any one of these is going to tell you, hey, this is the future, this is the truth, but you get to see data, because this shit nobody else is doing. This is going to give you an indicator of like, oh, confirmatory or not, data behind like the story that's going on up here. So if you can understand the data better than the market, you know what that means? Money. Yeah, so if you go through, you can check out that other video. Let me know what you think that is. It's before this one, and see what your thoughts are. I'd also like to know your thoughts on that question, as well as if you plan on actually exchanging. I personally don't plan on exchanging. If I did, right, if I thought Pulsex was more popular, then I'd be like, okay, cool. I'm gonna do what Arnold's doing. I'm gonna actually switch some Pulsex for Pulse in the pre-bridge, right? I'm not going to be doing that. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are. If you want to support the channel, you can check out some links down below. There's Twitter there, there's Instagram there, there's my other YouTube channel. That should also be popping up here. You can check out fitness related stuff on the fringe, just like we are on the fringe in the crypto world here. You can check out the fringe in the fitness community and all the awesome stuff over there. Appreciate you guys. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.